closed session regarding A, conference with labor negotiators CSEA, and B, conference with labor negotiators SMEA. Some information was shared, but there are no official updates available at this point in time. We will go back into closed session at the close of our regular board meeting to discuss item C, public employee performance evaluation. Could we please have
roll call?
Here.
Here.
Mr. Gillespie?
Here.
here? And if we could please stand to salute the flag. Ms. John Ferris, would you be so kind?
I will. Place your hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can't stand up with these earphones in, so. Okay, upcoming meetings and activities and events. Next Monday, January 18th, is an official holiday. Martin Luther King holiday is observed. So schools and offices will all be closed. And at this time, our next regularly scheduled board meeting is set for February 10th, 2021. Public comments are intended for members of the public to address the Board of Education on items involving the school district. Such testimony should be limited to 3 minutes each per person or subject and 15 minutes total per topic. If an answer to a specific question is requested, board president will, if appropriate, direct administration to respond in writing. Comments on agenda items?
None.
None. On non-agenda items?
None.
No public comments. So I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Lara, seconded by Mr. Hollinshead to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Is that roll call? Yes, roll call, please.
Aye.
He said aye.
Aye.
I think you're on mute.
Me? I'm not on mute.
No, I think
Kristen?
is.
Yeah, 'cause I can barely hear her. I can still barely hear her. I think it's her mask.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. We move to our consent agenda. Actions proposed for the consent agenda are consistent with adopted policies and approved practices of the district and are deemed routine in nature. They will be acted upon by roll call vote in one motion without discussion unless members of the board request an item's removal from the consent agenda, in which event it will be taken up in the order indicated on the main agenda.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
It has been moved by Mr. Hollinshead, seconded by Mr. Laura, to approve the consent agenda as presented. Roll call, please.
Mr. Laura,
Aye.
Mr. Hollinshead,
Aye.
Mr. Valencia,
Aye.
Mrs. Cordero.
Aye. We actually have no action items this evening, so we will move directly to item 8, discussion items. A, diversity, equity, and inclusion update.
And I'm gonna, although this is Ms. Dutra's item, I'm just gonna interject for a moment because this really came out of the conversation that the board and I had when we were in our virtual CSBA conference before Christmas. At each day, we kind of circled back and just shared on the day's events. And Vita had mentioned a session that she had been to where she had been presented around a book by the title of Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton, and really said, thought, can we do a book study? There's some conversation about bringing, a workshop setting because this equity access issue is so, embedded in everything that we do. And so when I got back, like I was actually gone for the conference, I sat the whole time at the same computer here in the Sousa Center. We went back into cabinet the next week. I brought that topic up and we had a long conversation, and Melissa shared some of the work that had already just begun with the teaching and learning team, with a small group of teachers around initiating this work. And so I thought, before as the board decides, so we're going to circle through this presentation, is what are the topics we really want to dig into, rather than just take a broad base? What are the things that maybe we would dig into in a workshop setting? So I'm going to ask Melissa to share the information where we are at this point, how it relates to pending policy, because we have some CSBA-based policy that is lagging in terms of update that we'll bring back as well. So I'll turn it over to Melissa and mute myself.
All right, can you see and hear it? I can't hear any of you. All right,
Yes, we can hear it. See it.
Thank you. I'm gonna forge ahead. So good evening, board members, superintendent, and our community watching online. Tonight, I'll be sharing an update on the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, work. I had provided a preliminary update to the board in a Friday memo. I think it was in October, just to front load the coming work. As I move through the presentation tonight, there are a few things to keep in mind. One, we're just at the beginning of this very comprehensive body of work. It is critical that all stakeholders understand that although this work deserves urgency, moving this will take time and stakeholder engagement to really take root in our system. The learning needed to shift mindset and behaviors cannot be a top-down approach. These topics address people's belief systems, cultures, philosophies, religious beliefs, and will create uncomfortable feelings and uncomfortable conversations. Knowing this, we will move with intentionality while engaging stakeholders in the process. So tonight I'll be walking you through the beginning of the work and share the next steps of the work to come. So what does it all mean? When you saw this agenda item, and even as I was just introducing the topic, you probably started thinking about what this work means from your own lens. What I would guess is that no one was thinking the exact same thing. This slide illustrates a sampling of what comes to mind when people hear diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Some feel passionate about entering from the culturally responsive teaching lens, train teachers on how to create culturally responsive classrooms, and that will create equity for all students. Some feel very passionate about race and want to have courageous conversations about the racial biases and inequities that exist for students of color. Some have a strong passion for our families of traditionally marginalized populations, wanting to ensure their voices are heard and needs are met. Others might want to immediately address the issues of bullying and marginalization of our transgender youth, whose suicide rate is drastically on the rise. The answer is that these are all critical and part of the DEI work. We cannot be naive or narrow and just focus in on one area. It's critical that we spend time defining these terms and the work that goes with them, so our system is moving forward to truly address diversity, equity, inclusion for all students, staff, and community. As we continue with this work, we have to consider equity for all, specifically for the historically marginalized population, based on ethnicity, language, gender, age, ability, sexual orientation, and all other aspects of culture. We all believe in equity and access for all of our kids. We all have a passion for all kids getting the best possible educational experience while under our watch. In acknowledging that, we know we have a lot to learn collectively to move this work forward systemically. So why are there so many issues to acknowledge and learn about and address in our schools? We only need to watch the news or follow the headlines. 2 Muslim students were sent home from school for wearing hijabs without permission slips. Do English language learners get stigmatized by teachers? A study says yes. UC Davis will create a 4-year program for students with intellectual disabilities. We need to address the digital divide causing an educational crisis. Educational equity ensures that all children, regardless of circumstances, are receiving the high-quality grade level and standards-aligned instruction with access to high-quality materials and resources. 40% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered suicide in the past year, a survey finds. The Trevor Project's 2020 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health paints a stark picture of pervasive mental distress among America's queer youth. Photos show difference in police response to anti-racism protests and the siege at the US Capitol. And here, right at home, right? Peaceful protest turns destructive in Santa Maria. These are just some of the national and community issues that schools are having to grapple with, that we are all grappling with. All these tensions directly affect our staff and students, and equity issues exist in all of our schools. So to have a general understanding of what is meant by diversity, equity, and inclusion, one only needs to Google to find a number of definitions, and there are a number of definitions. So although all have different nuances in wording, they all fundamentally have the same meaning. Diversity is the quality of being different or unique at the individual or group level. It is the presence of differences that may include race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic status, language, ability, disability, age, religious commitment, or political perspective. Populations that have been and remain underrepresented among practitioners in the field and marginalized in the broader society. Equity is the pledge of fair treatment, opportunity, and advancement while striving to identify and eliminate barriers. It is promoting justice, impartiality, and fairness within the procedures, processes, and distribution of resources by institutions or systems. Tackling equity issues requires an understanding of the root causes of outcome disparities within our society. And for our students, equity is reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails, interrupting reproductive practices that negatively impact vulnerable and marginalized students, and cultivating the unique gifts and talents of every student. Inclusion is the act of bringing together and harnessing differences in a way that is beneficial. It is an outcome to ensure those that are diverse actually feel and are welcomed. Inclusion outcomes are met when you, our institution, our programs are truly inviting to all. To the degree to which diverse individuals are able to participate fully and have developed opportunities within our organization or group. We hear a lot about equity versus equality, and this is a slide that should look very familiar as we've used it many times in meetings like our LCAP stakeholders, with our site admins, and those teams have turned it around to their teachers, but it's used to illustrate the difference between equality and equity. So in the first image, it is assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. They're being treated equally. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They are being treated equitably. In the third image, all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. The DEI body of work is the third picture. A lot of time and energy is spent with interventions and short-term solutions as shown in the second picture. Our collective work is to address the root causes and to remove systemic barriers for our marginalized students. So if you know me at all, you know we start with research and study, always research and study. So let's review some of the research and study completed so far. As some of you know, this is a passion project for me, as I was deeply involved in DEI work for years at the state level and in partnerships with organizations at the national level. Although I have a lot of knowledge and experience in this, there's always so much more to learn in the broad and nuanced body of work, and especially within the context of Santa Maria Bonita. So where did we start? We started with policies. We did a board policy review. Do we have all the board policies in place as called out by Ed Code, as called out by CSBA? Do we have what we need in board policy where we're making statements about our beliefs around this as an educational system? Then we've read books, articles, research studies, participated in professional learnings. I've really studied districts out in front of this work. There's a lot of great work out there and a lot of districts that are ahead of us. And so looking at their work, looking at what they've put together, what they've learned, finding districts that are similar to ours, and then what have they learned? What did they do? It's really critical that we learn from others. And then we did have some small group teacher meetings with some great teachers, 2 from Oakley, 1 from Bonita, and then our SMEA TOSA. And we met, and they're phenomenal, very, very passionate about this work. And we met, I think, 3 times, and they had a presentation. I mean, we've got great people out there, and I know you know that feel passionate about this work. And there's a lot of folks that feel passionate about this. What I learned was that defining of common language is critical, because I think we were all saying the same thing, but we were speaking different language at times because there's so much to this work. And so again, that was a cue to me that as we move forward, we all as a system need clarity on what exactly we're moving forward with. So when you look, there's some books I have here that were part of our learning. These are some of the leading books that folks in the state and nationally that folks are using to support schools in culture responsive teaching and creating equity in schools. So this little Unbound Ed here is some of our leadership team attended a Standards Institute that was called Leadership and Equity Training. And I think I put something about it in one of the Friday memos. They also have a phenomenal equity toolkit online that's free for districts to use. So they've got some great work there. They also partner often with TNTP, who we work with. And so just a great organization. Again, done some research. Gender Spectrum is one of the premier trainers and resources for schools in creating gender inclusive schools. EPIC is a national organization that has phenomenal trainings and great toolkits, all free to districts. for schools to interrupt inequities and to address issues head on. And then, of course, the all opportunity myth. This is a guiding document for districts throughout the country, including ours, to address the opportunity gap for students. These are just a sampling of the resources that we've already been studying and collecting for our ongoing work. For tonight, I pulled key learnings, just a few from the research and study from some of the top leaders in this work to give you a sampling of the learning. So of course we have Glenn Singleton and Courageous Conversations About Race. When Mr. Ontiveros came back, Ms. Cordero, and I can't remember who it was that asked for it, or maybe it was Vita, that I did a 2-year book study in this with 4,000 teachers, right? 114 schools. So it was a huge endeavor, did a lot of work digging into this. So very familiar with this work. But let's hear what Glenn Singleton has to say. To what degree do you and your system have the will, skill, knowledge, and capacity to understand and address issues of race as they relate to existing racial achievement disparities? Based on our experience, few classrooms, fewer whole schools, and far fewer entire school districts can offer up educators who are truly willing and prepared to address the racial achievement gap head on. Considering that the racial composition of our student population is rapidly changing, how will educators who are the racial inverse of the emerging student population arrive at a new and necessary level of cultural proficiency and instructional effectiveness? From Zaretta Hammond, and I see some folks nodding, absolutely a front runner in being studied nationally for how to support our marginalized students. This comes from her very popular Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. As educators, we have to recognize that we help maintain the achievement gap when we don't teach advanced cognitive skills to students we labeled as disadvantaged because of their language, gender, race, or socioeconomic status. Many children start school with small learning gaps, but as they progress through school, the gap between African American and Latino and white students grow because we don't teach them how to be independent learners. Based on these labels, we usually do the following: underestimate what disadvantaged students are intellectually capable of doing. As a result, we postpone more challenging and interesting work until we believe they have mastered the basics. By focusing only on low-level basics, we deprive students of a meaningful or motivating context for learning and practicing higher-order thinking processes. And these are a couple direct quotes from Zaretta Hammond from a session with her that I attended in Chicago 2 years ago that were very relevant. We need to talk about instruction. Don't confuse equity with diversity and inclusion, social harmony, multicultural, making students feel good about their racial identity, implicit bias, and courageous conversations. Those are not equity. Equity is reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails, interrupting reproductive practices that negatively impact vulnerable and marginalized students, cultivating the unique gifts and talents of all students. The courageous conversation we should be having is how to get the most powerful teaching for the neediest children. We are breeding dependent learners with learned helplessness. Academic mindsets help to regulate emotions of marginalized students. The equity conversation should start with who is carrying the cognitive load. Students are not confident until they are competent. Equity and access and instruction are not separate things. They will push back any progress we've made. Once children have ease in the learning process, that's how we close the equity gap. Oops. These are just a sampling of the guiding work that we have to support us moving forward. So we've talked about the why a little bit and some of the how from leaders in this work, but now we need to look at our district. it's critical that we start looking at our data through an equity lens to help identify and address our own systemic inequities. Here are a few, oops, I skipped one. I do not want to skip Dr. Fisher. No one tell him I skipped him. Here's one more. This is from Building Equity, and this is an incredibly popular book with districts to use about how to build equity in your schools. So imagine a school in which the student body truly represents the diversity of human experience, and each member is being prepared to interact, survive, and thrive as 21st century learners and world citizens. Imagine a school in which the kind of opportunity roadblocks that cause the haves to receive more of what education has to offer and the have-nots to receive less have been identified and eliminated, and all doors are open to opportunities to engage each student in challenging learning experiences. Imagine a school in which instructional excellence is the norm, and each member of the instructional team is not just committed to professional mastery, but also supported in a way that allows for its development and demonstration. And finally, imagine a school in which the student body is motivated and supported to discover their passions and advance towards positive, personal, familial, social, civil, and vocational goals and opportunities. So, like I was saying, it's critical for us to look at our data through an equity lens, right? So that we can identify the inequities in our system. Now, this is like a first look, like when there's a new show on TV, they only give you like 5 minutes. That's what it is, because we haven't done the deep dive into this yet, but it's just at first blush, taking a look at a number of different areas in our system where we might find inequities. Some we already knew, some are new. So there's a significant gap between our English learners and our non-English learners in ELA and math. We knew that, but we've got to work on that. Reclassified and long-term English learner suspension rates exhibit the largest impact of disproportionality compared to all other subgroups. So we have something to learn there. 5.3% of Californians identify as LGBTQ. If we took that percentage and compared that to our student population, it would say that 900 of our students may be identifying as LGBTQ or struggling to make sense of their gender identities. 1 out of 4 junior highs offer Spanish. 2 out of 4 junior highs offer career exploration. 2 out of 4 junior highs offer electives to English learners. 1 out of 4 junior highs provide a college field trip to every 7th and 8th grade student. So in those, you kind of see where you go depends on what you get. Those are inequities. So we're working on that. And the last one, Santa Maria Joint Union High School District, English learners are less likely to accomplish A through G requirements compared to all other subgroups. We have to own the high school's data. That's our kids. So we need to own that. And that's a big data point for us to look at. Why is there such high disproportionality there? What are we doing on our end? So by no means, I want to make sure you know this, by no means is this an exhaustive list. In fact, it's just a toe dip into analyzing all of our data. So for the next step with our data, the assessment and accountability team are going to be using the proportionality index to review system data through an equity lens. We're using this methodology tool so we know where the inequities lie to guide us in the prioritization of our future DEI work. Once our data has been analyzed, then we'll share the findings with our stakeholders and the board, which means you don't have to understand this tonight. You just need to know that we're starting the work of really looking at our data through a different methodology so that we don't miss any inequities that are happening. So we know what we're dealing with so that we know how to prioritize our work. So So now that we've looked at data through an equity lens, we want the board and for our stakeholders to know that just because we haven't started a formal work team on this topic doesn't mean we haven't been working for system-wide equity. So we've been doing a lot of work. We're not there yet, and we've got a lot more to do, but I do want to highlight some of the things that we've done. The number one thing that we've put in place is the equity and access through grade level instruction for all. That all kids must have access to grade level instruction every single day. That core adopted curriculum is used so that all kids are getting access. And when we adopted the core curriculum, they were developed with a focus on diversity. I appreciate that the state now, in their rigorous approval process, uses a diversity lens. So we know that a lot of that work is done at the state level, and then we look again on our level. We have a focus on grade level standards. Again, you heard from the experts, that's our entry point in. That's the first level of equity. We know we have a high quality instructional indicators, which just means we believe in certain things have to happen in a classroom. You have to have a culture of high expectations. Kids have to have access to challenging content. There needs to be student ownership, that kids are owning the bulk of the work and doing the bulk of the work. We have to support kids, which is like scaffolds so that kids can reach grade level standards. And then we have to assess that are assessments that are aligned to those grade level standards so that we can track progress of students so we know who needs more supports. The next thing that we've done is some work in our expanded learning programs. We're using this Cesar Chavez model curriculum, which some of you are familiar with. It's in full alignment with the CDE work around ethnic studies. We do that in our extended programs because it's not part of our tier 1 instruction, but we want to make sure kids have access to this. So it's in our expanded programs. We also do individual learning plans for our migrant students so that we have an extra eye on their progress and what supports they need. Again, the opportunity myth has been done with all of our schools. That is a guiding document for us in the why, because what we see in the opportunity myth is what we see in Santa Maria Bonita. Again, we've done some work with Unbound Ed. Many leaders and district staff, I think there's some teachers as well, have done book studies, webinars, trainings. So folks are really engaged in this kind of work. But again, it's a little bit all over the place, which is okay. Because then when we come together as a work team, we've got a lot of different folks that have learned a lot of different things on the topic. Our libraries, can't walk by our libraries. So our e-library, Sora, that we brought on, just within that, there's nearly 400 ebooks that were selected specifically with diversity lens in mind. And almost 1,800 of the ebooks are in languages other than English. And an exciting piece, we gave books to the kids in the fall. Really, it came out more winter. But we're doing another distribution in the spring. For PK, TK, and kindergarten, they're each getting 10 titles. 5 of those are in Spanish. In culture and climate, when we think about what's the culture that we're creating, when we did the board policy review, we did see that we have adopted some policies that we were supposed to. So we have a sexual harassment policy. We have a bullying policy. And we do have some bullying programs in place, but we're still looking at, are they enough, right? You can't just say you have a bullying program until you really look at it through the equity lens. So we're doing that work. And then, of course, you adopted an anti-discrimination statement. System level considerations in ARIES. Our team has done a great job. We now have a preferred name option in the system. So if a student doesn't identify with their birth or legal name because they're identifying as something else, we have that in the system so that a sub or homeroom teachers aren't calling them by the wrong name and having a moment of embarrassment. We don't want that. We're also working on the preferred pronoun also being in ARIES so that our teachers, our leaders, any support staff, they know if a student wants to be her, she, him, he. So that's already in there so that a student doesn't have to keep telling people. And again, that's really thinking about our kids. Some additional work, and I know you saw a little bit of that, those 4 data points around junior high. We're well aware of that, and as are our leaders and teachers. And so There's a body of work where we're in partnership with Hatching Results, which the high schools are also engaged in work with them. So this is a collaboration between the high school district, our district, and Guadalupe. And it's our administrators and counselors working together to assure that there's that alignment of opportunities for kids. So do we have equity across our junior highs? And then when they enter into the high schools, is there equity? Like, are kids getting the same educational experiences regardless of school site? But we're having the conversations both ways, because we can fix what we're doing at our junior highs, but we need our partners to fix what's happening at the high schools. And again, some of the specific work that the team is working on is making sure that all of our ELs have the same options as non-ELs when it comes to electives, because just because I need a section that's going to help me with language acquisition doesn't mean I don't get to have a really fun elective or something that's going to really connect me to school. That's super important for us. And then they're also working on career explorations, or CTE high school pathways. Right now, only 2 out of 4 of our schools have that career exploration. We want to make sure that that's expanded. And then we're also looking at what we're doing as a whole district, so that at every single grade level, kids are getting something around career and career and college readiness skills, so that when they get to junior high, it's not their first pass. And then when they get to high school, they can make really smart decisions about pathways that they want to enter. And then again, I call this review, because right now our equity and access team, again, are taking a deeper dive into these areas as kind of where to start in those priority areas. But really, it's not going to stay in a review. It'll turn into monitoring, because I was telling the team, we're never going to go back. You don't just look at equity data once. We're going to monitor that forever, because if we get there where we don't have any more disproportionality, we have to stay there, right? And so there's going to be a deep dive here, and then monitoring moving forward. This is definitely a strength for us, but always room for improvement. The outreach for our diverse populations. There's multilingual workshops to support college attendance and digital literacy. There's a number of other things. I just deleted a lot just so we wouldn't be here till tomorrow. There's language access for all of our parent meetings. There's culturally relevant art and creative workshops that they're doing for folks on the weekends. There's coordination with MISTEC, community organizations. There's interpretation training for staff to improve language access. And then, of course, we're building the capacity of our stakeholders through around our educational programs and supports through stakeholder meetings. And that's critical for us. And then we're engaged in that collaborative with the local districts. So this is the high school district, Guadalupe, Orchid, and Santa Maria Bonita. And who am I missing? Am I missing someone? I think that's all of us. Yes, that's all of us. We're on a team together, and we were meeting weekly, and now it's the assistant soups that are meeting together. In fact, we meet again this Friday around how do we make sure that we have PK 14 work moving for our community, not just the 1 district or 2 district, and not just the high school district trying to do something, but how do we really start operating as a community educational system? What we chose as our priority to focus on is that A through G data at the high school, because everyone contributes to that. So what can we all do in backwards mapping to figure out where are we going wrong, that we don't have a higher A through G data at the high school district? We're working on early warning systems and metrics so that we can see if we have large numbers of students not graduating with A through G. I'll just keep going with that one. Then we're going to look at who did graduate with A through G. And then we look at their profile, right? So that we can start to see where are our kids getting off track, and then how do we intervene right there so that we can get them right back on track. And then, of course, we're working on the seal of biliteracy. We have a pretty strong plan in place for our district. We do know that other districts want to join with us, which would only benefit all kids at the high school level to get more kids with that seal of biliteracy. It's phenomenal to me that we don't have more with so many students that speak another language. So we've got to really figure out how do we embrace and set our kids up for success on that. And then we're working on the CCR plan again. And then course placement and completion goes into that early warning system metrics. How are kids getting placed into courses at the high school? Does that need to be looked at? And then what are we doing to prepare our students so that they can get placed into every single opportunity that they want? And then who's completing the courses? Is there some inequity there? Do we have something to learn there? So that's the work that we're doing as a collaborative to collectively raise the bar for our kids so they have as many opportunities as possible after graduating high school. So next steps, which is just a few things, right? So next steps is we're going to engage stakeholders in the research and study. We're going to really focus on common learning because, again, we have to be talking the same talk. So we're going to have some common learning as a team, as a work team, to really think about what do we need to know. We're going to define common language so that when we say equity, we all mean the same thing. So we'll come up with what the common language is for the work that we have moving forward so that there's clarity in our system, right? We will figure out a communication and engagement strategy. I want to be clear. These are two different things. Communication is when we tell people stuff, right? Like we're going to communicate, here's the work that we're doing, or here's what's going on, or we communicate there's a meeting, here's the outcomes of that meeting. All of that is great, and we need to have it in place. But engagement, an engagement strategy is how do people engage, which is a give and take, reciprocal. I'm understanding, I'm internalizing, I'm owning, and I'm part of the conversation. I want to move this work, right? That's the only way. It's where I started. The first slide saying, we're only going to move this work unless we have full engagement as a system. And so we'll have to have a strategy for that. How are we going to do that? Because I don't know if you guys know, teachers, staff members, classified staff, they've got a couple things going right now, right? And so that's why we want to move this work with urgency, but in a way that it is not top down and it is engagement oriented, that it really is working together with folks in the system to move it in the right way. Then this team will prioritize next steps because as you saw, there's about 100 different ways we can go. And so really just to prioritize, what do we in Santa Maria Bonita need to do first, second, third? And then we'll create some recommendations. We'll bring those back to you as well. We also need to move forward as a next step with the equity policy and with a possible board study session. So let me explain the first two just a little bit more. In case you were wondering what the team would be working on or concerned we might forget something, we happen to have a lot of toolkits and materials, such as this one. That ensures that all work is inclusive and addresses the needs of our historically marginalized populations. The team we will assemble will start with some school leaders who are passionate about the work and a staff member that we would call a champion from each school site. So we know there's at least one teacher at every school site that has a passion for this work, that'll be a champion for it, that we need their voice in that work team. Once we have a clearer picture on the work, then we'll expand to include additional stakeholders, parents, community members, those kinds of things. So the main components of the work will include some organizational planning, which you can see we're already doing some of it, organizational policies, which again, we're looking at, organizational capacity building, community engagement and partnerships, data and information, research and evaluation. We've got to look at programs and then operations. So those are the big categories. And there's a ton of things like this to guide our work so that we can feel confident that we're moving forward in the right work and not forgetting anything. One of the first actions that I'll be bringing back for the board's review is a recommendation for an equity board policy. This sample came out from CSBA in July of 2018, in which most districts adopted soon after. So it's important for us to have a policy that guides the work. But to remember, the actual work of the team and all of our stakeholders, students, staff, community members, That is where the real work is and where the real change will begin. And finally, we're happy to offer a board study session, as Mr. Ontiveros said, so that you can engage in the same learning to further develop and support the work moving forward. This session could be on the front end, or it can be once the team has established priorities and has recommendations to consider. And with that, are there any questions and or feedback?
Thank you, Melissa. You want to catch your breath for a second?
I know.
Wet your whistle?
Chatty by nature.
Very inclusive and much appreciated. I think, what's the woman who you cited so?
Doretta Hammond.
Yeah. For me, I think her distinction from her specific quotes that you got were most relevant to me, and in that I think it really helps to keep the focus on what really is the why and what the goal is of equity, right? Where we kind of really put into action or make actual what those pictures are supposed to kind of be trying to portray. I think, as a board, if you look at our CSBA cycle that we go through in our Masters in Governance, and as far as how things evolve there, I feel like being at the front end would be a good thing. If only because it's really about trying to help be part of this, setting the priorities and the vision, and then you guys, get down to brass tacks to actualize that, and as that continues to evolve, then we come back to that. So I mean, for me, that feels the best. But man, super good stuff. I'm sorry Vita's not here, because I feel like this is something obviously that we're all passionate about, but she's always got such wonderful insight into these things. So, but yeah, I think the front end would be a great place to start. I think, and as Mr. Ontiveros mentioned, we had really kind of a very singular focus on equity at CSBA this year. So I think we've got a lot of stuff to bring from what we had there, and then our own individual experiences about where we're coming from.
I would generally concur with what. I would generally concur with what Mr. Hollinshead has just said. And since we have not yet addressed a board policy, it would seem like that would be a very good place to begin and get that established while having some conversation, about what each of us might have in terms of input for that, as well as an opportunity maybe to look at some of that data again. The data is very compelling for me anyway, and really drives the point home. But I'm also wondering if I don't know how a board would do a book study. Would we have to have special meetings to have those conversations? Or could we, attach them to our board meetings as just a discussion item for 15 minutes after we finish all of our business? I would be interested in this having a common base from where to go with conversation. Does that make sense? So, and I'm definitely open for what whatever anyone might suggest.
If I could suggest, it might be that I can bring 4, 5, 6 of really the books that would be most beneficial in our context, tell you a little bit about them, and then maybe at that time the board could choose which one really speaks to you as a board and you think would be a right fit for a book study. We can do that as well.
Okay, I'm good with that.
And I think there's some ways what we've learned through the technology. We could use, you know, some of the platforms we've been using in our system. You know, there's Google Classroom isn't convening of the board to do business. I mean, there is a way to address that issue. Linda, I appreciate you asking that question. Right, that we wouldn't have to be held to once a month or once every 2 weeks. You know, there's some pretty creative ways through technology that we can get that information exchange, because it's not really making a decision, it's just on the topic.
Okay, as long as we wouldn't be
Yeah.
violating any Brown Act issues. In fact, that might work out
Mhm.
very well. We could do little small assignments and put in our thoughts or responses or pose questions, that kind of thing.
And I've done book studies with board members, and it won't be too hard on them.
Thank you.
I just want you to know that I'm almost out of my rebellious stage.
Well, at one time I was an extremely conscientious student. I don't know about that anymore. I try.
Melissa, I do want to say thank you, because this presentation was, I think, really well done. I think it was really well thought out. And I love how you began by acknowledging how confusing this topic can be for many people, because you're right, when many people hear the word diversity and inclusion and equity, they think all of those different things, and maybe so many other things, right, that were not included in those little clouds. And so I think coming up with common language, right, and doing some common learning is really critical to move this work forward. I think acknowledging how difficult it can be for people at first, because we're dealing with topics that are embedded in our culture. Unfortunately, inequality, right, has been embedded in our history for so long. And I think that's really hard for many of us to soak in at first, because it flies so in the face of what we've been taught all our lives, including in school, right? And so I love how honest you are about the courageous nature of the work that we're doing. What we're asking our district staff and community to engage in is not easy, and yet we have the courage to go there anyway. And I love how you acknowledge the fact that our data as a district, we have so many things to be proud of. And yet we can also at the same time acknowledge the areas where we have plenty of room for growth. And I think that based on my learning from the Masters in Governance program with the California School Board Association, when they talk about effective districts, they talk about districts that own the issues that they need to work on, and at the same time partner with the community agencies and other schools so that we can work together. So instead of the finger pointing that often happens, we're saying, hey, no, we're willing to own our stuff. We're going to work at getting better. It's your turn to do the same, right? And we as board members have committed to doing that learning ourselves. We are going to be doing this work with you. You're absolutely right. This is not top-down stuff. This is all of this working together on this. And I think I'm really proud of this work that we're going to be doing, because if we don't get to these inequities, how are we going to get our students to the point where they can be successful? We know that through research, which I love that you began with also, let's not just talk about opinions. We all have opinions. Let's look at the facts, right? Let's look at what researchers are telling us about how we can get better. So we're an educational institution, and I love how we are modeling. We're not just talking the talk, we're also walking the walk. So I'm really excited about this work. And I love how you also mentioned the equity policy or lack thereof. That's something that I'm, as a new board member, I wanted to ask you that question. Do we have an equity policy? And if we don't, that might be one of the issues that we address in the beginning. As a statement to our institution and to our community, that we are affirming our belief in this work, and that we are going to dedicate policy, not just words, to this work.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Yes, I think I was, we do need to.
You
get
muted
that
again, Linda.
We need to get that policy.
In place to establish the foundation. So to me, that would be the starting point.
I agree. I'm ready to bring it up. So we wanted to do this presentation first, and then that will be the next thing that comes to the board as we put our team together.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? That was a very good presentation. Very good. So thank you, and I will acknowledge receipt of that information and move on to item 8B, my very favorite topic, COVID-19 status update.
Well, I'm at the end of my presentation. That won't work.
Are you sure?
Let's start with questions.
Sorry, I needed to make sure I was unmuted because I've done this numerous times, got in and been muted and not been able to unmute myself. So let me go back. So here we are in a new year, and we're still talking about the same topic. And I just want to give you an update on some things that are occurring as we speak relative to COVID-19, the governor's recent initiative for looking to return to in-person instruction. And I'm sorry, this isn't going to be as exciting as the topic that Melissa just presented at this point. I'll just give you a little foreshadowing. So I want to do a couple of things just quickly. Review the considerations for that return to in-person instruction that are part of the California Safe Schools for All plan, which is the governor released on the 30th, the concept. Much of it still needs to be worked through the legislature. I'm actually going to be participating in a webinar tomorrow with the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence on some of the bones that may be coming out of that. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the points that came out of his presentation on the 30th. But I want to share with you this resource overview, and I'll share this presentation with the board in Friday's update. That's just a summary that briefly, and it's very brief, it's one page, talks about the pillars. There's some funding that's available through an incentive grant for schools to assist schools in the ability to return to in-person instruction. There are some triggers for safety and mitigation that include testing, provisions for testing, and I'll talk about that more in detail. Additional PPE, some commitment to contact tracing, but I'm also going to share some of our county data that I got from the Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday. That is kind of a current state of events on where we are in contact tracing in Santa Barbara County. And then give a little bit of an update on what we know so far about vaccinations. And that is work that's in progress right now for those in the education field. We are in Tier 1B, which is the second tier. Right now we're still working on healthcare. Still about 50% of healthcare workers in Santa Barbara County have been vaccinated at this point. And I just got a communication late this afternoon that public health is asking schools for kind of a breakdown. What's the profile of your school staffs so they can start considering what that might look like for school systems, hopefully beginning in February. But again, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to that. And then transparency and accountability, some of the dashboard, that's really what's in the works through this legislation. So this is the overview. This link is in the presentation as I make it available to you.
before you get.
Yes.
started, in some of the CSBA update information that we get daily, one of the points that was made, especially regarding these grants, is that they've been put out there, but it hasn't been approved.
That is true. This is a proposal at this point, and that's why I say that it's still being worked through the legislature. It's a concept, but to the governor's credit, he's given some parameters so that folks can get moving in the right direction. So when and if those lines cross, it'll minimize the time frame to get things in place. And so I'm going to share just a few slides from his presentation. This is kind of the overview that I just shared out of that web page, but these are kind of the 4 pillars: that funding, the safety measures, the oversight and assistance, and that transparency and accountability to really, communicate out what's actually happening in real time. So the phased in portion is this: to start with the youngest disproportionately impacted students, to begin with in-person learning, really this says K-6, but the primary focus is TK to 2. To continue with the cohort design that we're still trying to get our heads wrapped around for our kids in light of our local rates, and I'll cover that when I get done here with the governor's proposal, with the idea that communities would be on track for safe in-person instruction by the early spring. COVID rates right now make that a little bit of more of a daunting task than just the words on the page, but that really is the intention. And then also to ensure that distance learning will remain an option for parents and students for whom the return to school is not something that they would consider, regardless of the ability to reopen for in-person learning or not. The new state measures, in brief, are these: that schools may reopen if they submit a COVID-19 safety plan to both local and state officials. And again, Linda, to your point, the criteria is still in the works as we speak. The local health department will be involved. The local health department has the ability to disapprove, as in when they were accepting waivers under the prior design, it was all about approval. This is really disapproval, because we already have a lot of the safety protocols in place. We've all filed the reopening, so we've got the directional traffic flow on sites, the temperature testing, the sanitization, the mask wearing, all those pieces that were new to us 6 months ago are pieces that'll be included. So it's really a matter of disapproving. And then once opened, local and state officials will monitor, support, and enforce guidance, which is an interesting term, to enforce guidance. That I guess really I would qualify as to really reinforce the guidance, right? To make sure that we're following those protocols. One of the new things is that a county must have a 7-day average case rate of less than 28 cases per 100,000 people per day to implement the plan. Okay, and right now, I think there are 3 counties in the state that meet that criteria, and I'll share that data in a few slides. This is one of the conditions around testing. So the state will support implementation of testing of all school staff and students on a tiered approach still. So starting to the far right, because that's where Santa Barbara County falls, we're greater than 14 per 100,000 case rate, although we're not less than 28 at the moment. So that the option is not available to us, but these conditions would be if we were able to get below 28 cases. Schools would be required to administer to all staff symptomatic and response testing across all levels, which means that if someone is exhibiting symptoms, you've got to be able to test, or in response to contact tracing, to test those that would fall within the requirements of contact tracing. But in addition, schools would be required to offer weekly asymptomatic testing to all students and staff. Now, right now, we're doing the surveillance testing, which is once every 2 months. And credit to Matt Beecher, who's on this screen. He has really knuckled down to get this up and running. And it's been a task for Quest Labs that we're working with, who is a service provider with a lot of bandwidth, just for our about 2,000 members just of our staff. And so when you talk about weekly asymptomatic, every student, every staff member being tested, I'm a little perplexed as to how we're going to be able to do that. Part of this proposal is the state has procured a testing facility that has the capacity to process 150,000 tests a day. So I'm not the sharpest pencil in the box, but I know that we have 6 million students in California, thereabouts, and I think 6 million divided by 5 is greater than 150,000. So there's still some capacity that needs to be built in order to be able to support testing on a weekly basis, let alone every 2 weeks, which is where the purple and red fall. So that's going to be a big challenge if we're able to hit those rates. And so that's just kind of the salient points. And again, there's much more to come out of this plan that has not been officially approved yet, but the concept that's out there. Question, and it does provide, the incentive grant is $450 per student, and it could be more depending on demographics, is what's been proposed. There's some expectations that agreements will be signed with employee associations around all those conditions before the implementation of the in-person learning, according to the plan design. And again, we're still waiting on the details of the plan elements. So from there, that's just kind of the latest news out on the horizon. I want to go back and look at some of the statewide, where we are statewide, countywide, and relative to those local case rates. This is actually the reporting that came out yesterday. The reporting date of the 12th. And here's the map that shows that at present, 54 of the 58 counties are currently in the purple range. You'll notice where I have the arrow that the statewide case rate is 91.7 new cases per day per 100,000 across the state, which far exceeds the 28 to 1 that's a requirement for the eligibility for the Safe Schools Plan. And when we look at Santa Barbara County, we are currently at 60, our adjusted case rate as of January 2nd is 64 daily cases. So we're more than double that threshold at this point on a countywide basis. Because I've kind of become an amateur epidemiologist over the last several months, what I've found is it's always beneficial to see where Ventura County is, because we're kind of a ripple that extends out of Ventura. Ventura County, as of that reporting date, is at 72.7 adjusted case rate, but their actual case rate's 131.4 daily cases per 100,000. So it's likely that we'll see an uptick over the next few weeks. Again, after we're only a week after or 2 weeks after the New Year holiday, so we'll probably tend to see some ongoing growth, which is supported in this next set of slides that actually come from the County Board of Supervisors report yesterday. They had the Public Health Department update on countywide metrics. So this dark line is that adjusted case rate from back in February of 2020. You see that high point we hit in July was about 30 cases when the metrics that came out over the summer that initially ordered the distance learning for all schools that exceeded the 7 cases. We were at about 30 at that point. And these points along this far right are the last 4 reporting cycles. So 64 cases is back to January 2nd. a week prior to that, December 26th was 38. On the 19th was 30.8, and back on the 12th of December, right before we hit the Christmas break, the countywide adjusted rate was 25 cases. And so we've seen a dramatic upswing since then, which was predicted by most public health experts after the Thanksgiving break, and has continued through Christmas and is likely to continue beyond the new year. This was in the report also that's troubling to me. This is a breakdown, the percentage of COVID cases by occupation for the last week of December. And if you look down where my arrow is, I'm pointing at the population under 18 over the entire course of the pandemic has represented about 15.4% of cases. But during that last week of December, it's the under 18 population is accounted for about 20%. And there's a lot of, a lot of what the governor's plan is based on is that some studies have shown that there's not increase in outbreak associated with students in schools, because what we've read is that most young adults are less symptomatic, but it doesn't mean they're any less susceptible. And so that's a concern for our area, because we do have multiple families living in homes and multi-generational families that we have to consider in terms of what that transmission rate might be. And so this community dashboard really points out, see, I think I have one. This is the daily case rate. On this dashboard, there is a portal that breaks down by geography, gives daily case rates by communities. And so this gray line, I've isolated the Santa Maria census tract. And so this, if you follow the arrow back in July at our high point, we were at 64 cases, average new daily cases over 7 days per 100,000 population. And we almost got in that late October period. You remember when back in October, I made this presentation to the board, we actually were under 7, and we were hopeful that if the rates were to continue to decline, we might, see some daylight on the horizon. But what happened right after Halloween was we saw those rates really start to escalate through the Thanksgiving holiday, through Christmas, and the reporting date as of the 9th, which is they report a 4-day lag, is currently 128 daily cases over that 7-day average per 100,000 just for the city of Santa Maria. So we're really seeing a huge upstream. That's equivalent to what Ventura County is at this point on their actual case rate. And so I go back to, kind of been singing this one note song since September as I've been doing this presentation monthly, and our communication has really been to follow the data and to follow the recommendations. And even though the case rate that allows schools to reopen has been increased from 7 to 28, our rate has doubled, has gone from 64 to 120 to, at present. And so we will continue to monitor those numbers. We're continuing and continuing to work on that, what we might look like in terms of bringing smaller groups back, because I remember when I brought it back in November, we were talking about cohorts, and I didn't put a timeline on any of that work because we really wanted to follow the science. And as this rate continues to go up, we're holding off on those timelines because, again, our primary focus is how do we assure community, as community health is our priority. And so we will continue following that. We'll continue trying to sharpen our saw around distance learning. I mean, again, I want to commend all of our schools and staffs and our families and kids for really hanging in there and doing the best they can under these circumstances. But the circumstances, don't look like they're going to get much better soon. So questions, considerations, solutions?
My comment regarding the plan for safe school reentry in regard to testing is there is no answer, but I simply do not understand why a requirement such as that would be included when there is no proven capacity to accomplish that. I mean, Matt has indicated, we're having some issues with the surveillance testing that's on the rotation. And based on our conversation, we're one of very few districts in the county that has even started doing surveillance testing. Is that because other districts cannot find providers? So putting money out there and saying, here, apply for this grant, but oh, by the way, this one little requirement here, we'll just keep that money till you can do that. That to me is like taunting. But
and even beyond that, the money doesn't resolve the issues that are in front of us, right?
No.
The public health conditions that we're faced, because we're all here wearing masks. My comment to the individual from public health in the meeting we had, the county superintendents, was, they said, we haven't seen transmission in schools. And I said, that's because most kids haven't been in school. Sadly.
Well,
right.
Where they've done they've done studies elsewhere where they've studied other indicators too, right? And not with the ideal that there was going to be any inference that kids should be back in school. But one of the other indicators they looked at was hospitalizations and in areas where there were kids in school, rather than looking at positivity rates to see how it affected the community at large. And that needle didn't really move much. But we've got such capacity right now at Marion that we can't afford to even, and with our positivity rate where it is, we can't afford to even push that the smallest bit, right? We're not in a position to responsibly think about that stuff and have the impacts on our community that they might, or the negative it's just too much burden. And that's also affecting the communities to the north, because we've got so many people who work who work here and live in San Luis County. That I think with vaccines, maybe that some of the conversation will start to change a little bit. For me, part of what we just talked about with equity is some of what we're going to be, I think, looking at, and that's the learning mitigation, or the learning loss mitigation aspect of it. And how are we going to start to, maybe even in anticipation of not being back in small cohorts or what have you, start to look at what's our vision of what we can do, either with extending the school year, or what things are going to be equitable and put our kids in a position where they're able to succeed in the years to follow. I mean, for me, that's a big part of it. But yeah, it doesn't look 100 when they raise the standard fourfold, and you're still nowhere close to it. Things are looking a little grimmer than they were before.
Yeah, Linda and I were at the County School Boards Association meeting last week, and I said I feel like the more I know, the less I understand.
And that is just so apparent. I don't even feel like we're learn by doing. It's like we take a step and see how far we sink and then try to pull ourselves out and inch a little bit further forward. I honestly don't know that there's ever been a period of time where education has faced such extraordinary challenges. But one thing we have learned is that we're not ready to forego face-to-face instruction. We have not found that to be the panacea.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think what we have found out of necessity, though, to try and look a little, maybe the cup a little bit full, is that there are ways that we're getting through to kids that we weren't able to get through to before. And so trying to make good out of some of this difficulty, I think moving forward, that we'll be able to kind of integrate some of those practices and identify some of those kids and really figure out how we can establish a best atmosphere and setting for them to continue to excel in and feel included in and partake in education. So
and that we may be able to capitalize on what you were talking about before, John, and creating some alternative options. We've only thought of really, more of the same.
Exactly.
Right. So
Right.
So we have expanded our bandwidth.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it in the junior highs a lot, and I think that's I think and what Melissa's talking with the counselors and working from the high schools down with our junior high counselors, and start with our 7th graders, we can really start to expand some of that kind of continuity too. So I mean, it's all really confusing, and it can be from a social emotional standpoint really difficult for our kids and our teachers to not see one another. But I think too, our responsibility is to continue to support, not that we haven't, but to continue to support them in what they need and what their feedback is, as we continue to check in with them and see how it's going for them.
Yeah. And again, I want to, Mr. Lar, Mr. Valencia, if you have any questions, comments.
I would say one of the things that I spoke with Luke about recently that gives me some reassurance is that we've been really good about not setting a date, right, and telling our community, hey, this is the date by which things are going to open up, and then that leaves false hopes. Unfortunately, unfortunately things are getting worse right now and not better. And so I really appreciate the fact that we as a district have done that, because we're following the science. All of us, of course, want to be in person again. That is the ultimate goal. But it's nice to know that in our district, we are reassuring our community and our staff that we're not going to put our community in danger until we know we're not going to put them in danger, and we're not going to return until it's absolutely safe to do so. And so I think that reiterating that message as much as possible will lower the affective filters, right? In terms of kind of putting people at a little bit more ease, so that our staff can do their jobs as effectively as they can, so our students can learn as effectively as they can. And so I just want to show some appreciation for all of our district staff that have been leading these difficult efforts to bring as much peace as possible to our communities during this really difficult time.
I appreciate that comment, Ricardo, because I did send something out to principals, letting them know we'd be having this conversation tonight, gave them a little bit of a clue into the Safe Schools plan, but it is my intention after, I wanted to get feedback from the board first to really communicate, just to reinforce that message, because that is what we have been sharing, and we will share it again now that we're in 2021, especially to our families who've been so responsive, as they always are, to the needs of their children, but even more so in this time of distance learning, to take on that additional responsibility. I'm in awe of parents and parents and grandparents and aunts, uncles, families groups of parents that are managing that responsibility, because it is a task that, just like, we our preference, as you say, would be to have our children in school, but to make do with what we're doing, as long as we continue to support each other, we're always stronger together.
I absolutely agree. Any other comments? With that, I will acknowledge receipt of the COVID-19 status update and consideration for return to in-person instruction. And board superintendent reports. I do have a question. And Brian, this might not be fair, but how has been the student return rate?
Yeah. So I don't have updated numbers for today yet. They'll start tonight, but I know yesterday we were at 15,900 logins. So looking really good for Tuesday.
Okay.
And I appreciate you asking that question. I'll include that in the update. I'll pull that graph that we've done before,
Okay.
because I know Brian can show me how to do that again.
Okay, any other board reports? Mr. Ontiveros, you alluded to the County School Board Association meeting last week, and while the conversation did not revolve around the safe return to school plan that the governor had put out, most everyone was still status quo, and probably the most interesting presentation was by Dr. Salcido. So we're all in the same situation. We're waiting to see what's going to happen and trying to make the best decisions possible for our staffs and our students, most importantly. So I commend our county for really being on top of the information and really working with the Department of Health and really getting that information. And I don't know how you could make good decisions without having that information. So I will give credit to you, Luke, and to the county for making sure that we do know what's going on. So, Mr. Ontiveros?
I don't have any comments, but I do want to give Mr. Beecher a minute, because the governor did propose his budget last Friday. I think Matt and Brian are going to the school services conference on Friday, but I wanted him to be able to just give you some of the preview. We sat through a CSBA webinar on Friday afternoon. It was late Friday afternoon, just to give you some of the trends, because there is some different news from what had been conveyed earlier. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ontiveros. As you said, Brian and I will be attending the school services budget governor's proposal budget workshop.
Virtually or in person?
Absolutely virtually. I mean, I will be there in person, but the rest of the folks will be virtual. So that is always very interesting. Brian and I think I've shared before, we used to take a trip to Sacramento for this conference, and we leave early, drive all the way to Sacramento, attend the conference at 12:30 or 1 o'clock or whatever, finish up the conference at 4:30 and drive back. And that was always awesome. There's nothing better than spending 10 hours on the road with the same person like that. And I know Brian is disappointed he's not here to share that with you, so I will. He's disappointed not to be able to do that this year. But the conferences remain top notch with school services. The same high caliber staff they've always had are there to present. They are in a room, they have their podiums and their presentation. It's very well done. So I'll share what I learned from that with the school board when it becomes apparent. But I did take a few notes out of the CSBA webinar, and then also CASBO and School Services and CASH have all thrown out their kind of analysis, predictive analysis of what the budget might look like. And I just want to share some of that information with you. There's kind of four main components to the budget. Obviously, it's massive, right? Hundreds of pages. But there's four main components that I think will impact Santa Maria Bonita. There's like the general, maybe the base budget, which is kind of the big picture where they roll out COLA, they address the economy, and deferrals is one of their bigger components. Then there's a piece of it that is the governor's priorities, the things that he thinks are most important to address with the money that's available. Then I want to talk about how they roll out in our district locally, right, with our declining enrollment and that impact. And then again, like I shared when we went over the first interim, the reappearance of AB 1835, I described that the governor had vetoed that bill and then pledged to work with the Department of Finance to come up with a method to accomplish the same goal in a way that was more transparent and maybe a little lighter than what the CDE might be coming up with. And so that is a part of his proposal as well. In the big picture, like I described when we talked about the first interim, the LAO had presented a windfall, right? That was the word they used. The governor also shares that there's about $15 billion coming to schools. He says it's the biggest, single year increase for education. It is the largest education budget ever, which is always the case in California because we're committed to a percentage of the budget, and the budget generally grows every year. So every year it is always going to be the biggest budget education has ever seen until sometime when the economy shrinks drastically. And so at this point, that is the truth. It is the largest budget ever. The cost of living adjustment is 3.84%, which I think surprised a lot of people that that would be the way that COLA would roll out. The interesting part of that is the 2.31% of that is connected to 2021. So it's because of the additional solutions that were in the 2021 budget that were beyond what was necessary that are now coming back to be almost like a retro, if you will, for 2021 coming in the 21-22 budget, and then 1.5% for 21-22. And then with that $15 billion increase in resources available to the governor, he's using 2/3 of those funds. I'm sorry, he's using about half of those funds to pay off 2/3 of the deferral that will start in February. So the thing that's super important on that is to realize that the February deferrals are going to start. They will happen each month sequentially for the remainder of the year, and then they'll get repaid as planned in July, August, September, October, and November. The money he's using, the $7.4 billion he's using, are to discontinue those, to not reinstitute those deferrals in 21-22, okay? So one of the biggest components of this increase he's using to pay the money we expected to receive anyways, that he promised to pay us anyways. The next thing is some of his specific priorities, and we talked a lot about one of them already, his Reopening for All plan, where he offered to provide $450 per student to districts to open under specific conditions, right? And one of the things I wanted to share with the board is I did a really quick back of the napkin calculation for 16,700 students and 2,000 staff at $55. It comes out to a weekly cost of about $1 million. If you started on March 16th and went through June the 8th, that's 84 days or 12 weeks. It's $12 million or $740 per student. So it's a good start, but there's a lot. There's a lot to reopening that I don't know necessarily have, Linda, as you said, have been thought through all the way. But it's incredibly expensive if all of that testing is going to be funded through district resources. Let me get back to my notes. I'm sorry. There's a lot to the budget. I wanted to make sure that I included just enough. Also, he added.
Hey, Matt, Linda had a question.
I'm sorry.
I just $740 per student just to do the testing or per person?
If we're going to test every student and every staff member every week for $55 per student, which is a lot less than we're actually paying right now for surveillance testing, that's the cost. Just on the back of the napkin, I wrote it up real quick while we were talking earlier in the board meeting.
Okay.
So,
Yikes.
and that's,
So $450 is a drop in the bucket.
and honestly, I'm sure as these choices were made about what numbers to use, some of it was connected to what are the resources that we have available. And just make money out of whole air as a state, or out of this lot. I'm getting it correctly, or my analogy correct. But the other thing is, there's a lot of other resources coming from the federal government and from the state to support instruction during COVID. So I'm imagining there's some math behind the scenes to connect all those resources that we're not aware of. But that quick back of the napkin, before we even talk about the logistics of trying to get 18,000 people tested in a 5-day cycle, and then tested again in a 5-day cycle, and then tested again in a 5-day cycle, it's really, really challenging. But I appreciate that question. Also in his priorities, he's got about $315 million for educator professional development. And then about $225 million set aside for teacher pipeline programs. And in those teacher pipeline programs, I believe we also have the classified employee credentialing program that we've seen a few of our employees take advantage of, which is really also very important. People who already have education in their blood, pursuing that education, pursuing that development, becoming teachers. He also is putting about $300 million aside for special education, especially for early students in birth to 4 years old range. And then also, as we talked about, student health and well-being programs that are related to student support outside of just their academic needs, but the social emotional components. He's also set some money aside for relief from the PERS and STIRS increases. What's important to note here is on the CalSTRS side, there is actually a reduction from the projected or from the current year STIRS rate, but on the PERS side, there's still an increase between years where the rate based on his budget is 23%, but currently the district's paying 20.7%. So we would still have a cost increase, there would just be a slight savings. So to kind of wrap up on the governor's proposal, again, along with the $14.9 billion increase to the Proposition 98 guarantee, the almost half of that is used to pay off deferrals, essentially loans we made to the state government currently, like starting next month. And also within that discussion comes the acknowledgement that there's a structural deficit in the state's budget, that in the out years, we're expecting 22-23 to have a $7.6 billion budget deficit at the state and $11 billion in 24-25. So that's also looming out there, is that a lot of the funding, as I described during the first interim presentation, is one-time funding. So on the declining enrollment side of the house, again, over the years and when we went through the budget crisis from 07, 08 and 08, 09, we had a growing enrollment that really helped address a lot of those issues. This year currently, we're down about 300 students from last year, which is down about 200 students from our peak in 2017-18 at 17,122. And our projections are relatively flat going forward. One of the things that I need you to know is that our biggest decrease is in kindergarten enrollment. We are expecting, our consultant expects, and the folks that I've talked to or heard from on a national level say those students are out there, the projection that those students would come to school, they're based on real and reliable projections and estimates, but they're not coming to school right now because of the conditions that exist, and they're out there. So we'll see them eventually, and so that's the way we built our staffing, is if those students will return for in-person instruction next year, that they'll be in first grade when they promote from kindergarten or a kindergarten age this year, and the kindergarten students will arrive next year. But also, what will occur is we will have a reduction in our revenue based on a lower ADA factor. We've been protected for the last couple of years, carrying forward a larger ADA amount for our LCFF calculations. And the thing that's really important is it's very challenging to reduce spending and to adjust service levels to reflect that reduction in revenue. Because just as students don't arrive in nice, easy packets by school and grade, they don't depart in the same fashion. So it's really, really important that we make good decisions, disciplined decisions about new investments and new commitments going forward. Because at this point, we look like we know that we'll have declining enrollment, and out on the out years, we have structural deficit of state that they'll have to address. So the last topic that I brought up was the AB 1835 conversation. The way that it reads in the governor's document is the budget includes statutory changes to address concerns that some local educational agencies allocate funds for increased and improved services and then leave them unspent, reallocating them for other purposes in the future. This statutory language requires that, once established, a local educational agency's responsibility to increase and improve services continues until fulfilled, and increases the specificity required of county offices of education in their review of local educational agencies' LCAPs. So that what that essentially means is your supplemental and concentration grant dollars need to be invested in serving those students who generate those dollars. And then that last part is that the county office will be the one that has oversight of making sure that's what occurs. So yesterday afternoon, I emailed Bill Redgway, the CDO at the SB CEO, just to start the conversation of what that's going to look like, to make sure that we're well informed, again, as we're making choices going forward on what that's going to be, how that's going to roll out. Because as we also covered in that first interim conversation, in 2019-20, we had around $11 million in unspent supplemental and concentration grant revenues in 2019-20, but we only had a $2.9 million surplus in the unrestricted general fund, which means that in our funding, we have a hidden structural deficit where the base is overspent by about $9 million. And so wisely navigating how to reduce that dollar amount, and Ms. Cordero, you and I talked about it a little bit during the board meeting about how do you identify or re-identify and address what is base and what is supplemental. That conversation started a few years ago, and it will continue, and it will be a part of how we get through this. A big part will be understanding how it gets reported and how it gets monitored with the county to know what the moving pieces are. So that's why I made that call right away to Bill Ridgway to get that information. So,
any questions for Mr. Beecher? And on that bright, happy note,
I just wanted to give Matt an opportunity to give you that information ahead of time before. I just wanted to give you, Matt, an opportunity to give that overview before information, starts coming out. Like with the Safe Schools Plan, it's a proposal. So just wanted to give you that sneak preview. So I appreciate. I kind of put him on the spot yesterday and asked him just if he come up with some salient talking points, just so we know. He'll be at the school services workshop on Friday, news will start coming out as it comes through those advocacy groups. So we want to make sure you're getting the information up front.
And are we still in board and superintendent comments or reports?
Yes, we are.
I'm not sure if any other board members had a report out, but I'm definitely, I would like to share a report if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did want to say to the staff, to welcome back, right, to the, from the winter break. I hope everybody, got some good rest and read some good books or saw some good shows on TV. But now it's back to work time, so now time back to adjust my sleeping schedule, which is a little bit right now. And I did get a message from a community member recently, and I wanted to share this with the community and with all of us because it really, I think what happened on January 6th, last week, literally a week ago, I think has really shook, right, our nation and has really caused an additional amount of angst during a period in our history that is already really tough. So I just want to acknowledge how difficult these times can be. And for us to, I think what was previously mentioned earlier, to reach out to those resources that we have available, whether it's therapy, counselors, those of us that work with students, we have the privilege, right, of being able to work with our young people. And this is a really traumatic time, right? People are suffering from food insecurity, also fear of, being kicked out of their homes, right? Because people are losing jobs. So I just really want to, remind us of the context in which we're working in. We know that we're asking a lot out of a lot of our staff. So I just really want to thank you and really honor that. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to read this statement, which acknowledges the events of January 6th from the perspective of some school leaders who created a letter just acknowledging what happened and giving some direction for our school staff on how we might proceed moving forward. Because as some of you know, I'm a teacher at Santa Maria High School, most of which of those students come from Bonita, including myself. And if you could hear some of the questions and comments that our students had to say about these events, you would be blown away. You would think you'd be in a college classroom. So I love honoring how intelligent our students are. And that is a product of our school district, Bonita. So I want to thank you for sending over such brilliant kids. And then my job is to just continue to try to sharpen that saw. So let me go ahead and read that statement to you all, because I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't mention this very historical event. So here's what the letter had to say. And the author, I believe, is Faris Sabah, who, but my understanding, is perhaps a superintendent. And I know that worked in the migrant program as well, based on the community member that sent me this. So here's what they had to say. It's titled, Letter to Our School Community from Our School Superintendent. Yesterday, this is dated January 7th, we watched in horror and outrage as a violent mob stormed the US Capitol in a deadly effort to disrupt the certification of the election victory of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It also left us with questions as educators and parents as to how we would help our youth and children make sense of this assault on our democracy. As educators, we are charged with the responsibility to educate students about the important history that shapes current events, builds their capacity for critical thinking, and inspires them to actively participate in civic engagement to help make their communities safer and stronger. We recognize that education is essential for our democracy. In fact, preparing the next generation of compassionate, ethical leaders and citizens is the very reason many educators enter the profession. These events in our nation's capital have some members of our community, especially our students, frightened, confused, and upset. Our teachers and administrators are looking at how to establish a safe space for conversation and learning about these still evolving events today and in the weeks to follow. We are encouraging students expressing fear or distress about what they witness to reach out to their teachers, principal, or counselor for support. We are also thinking about the questions parents and guardians might have about how to talk to students about these events. We would like to share some resources to help you with these at-home conversations. And in their letter, they list some resources from the NEA, the National Educators Association, as well as a few other reliable sources of information. To continue the letter, There are so many lessons we can learn from this stark episode. The ways in which yesterday's event unfolded in Washington, D.C. reveal a striking and important discrepancy. Our children are witness to the vast disparity between the most peaceful treatment of this seditious mob and this summer's brutal treatment of protesters standing up and speaking up for racial justice at Lafayette Park. Perhaps the greatest lesson for our children and our nation is if you sow discontent and fear, you reap hatred and violence. We must continue to champion the power of education to end intolerance, disrupt systemic inequity, and create safe spaces for dialogue, unity, and growth. The partnership between educators and parents has been both challenged and strengthened over the last few months of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let us come together once more as a community to ease our children's anxiety and remind them of their role as protectors of our democracy. As we have shown time and again, when our community comes together during celebration or tragedy, we thrive and are all better because of that mutual support. And then it's signed by a variety of superintendents throughout the state of California, I believe. So I just really want to remind our staff. I know from talking to Mr. Ontiveros that our school leaders have received some reliable sources on how to have these conversations with students. And I hope that our teaching staff feel empowered to have these courageous conversations with students, because we also know from research that oftentimes educators shy away from discussing controversial topics with students because they're worried about potential backlash. But I want to encourage our staff to engage in these conversations. They are tough to have, but if we use research, if we use facts to engage in these conversations, I think it's going to really help our students and our staff deal with this very difficult period in time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd just like to recognize Melissa and her staff for putting together the content for the work they've been doing, but also for the presentation this evening. Excited about the opportunity it provides to the board to get to be on the ground floor. So often, things come to you after the fact. And so to really get an opportunity to be engaged really reinforces the best of what we have to offer to bridge those gaps that we've seen persist for, across a great period of time. So thank you, Melissa, for all your hard work, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yes, I would concur with that. Thank you to everyone. And let's move ahead with the positive attitude, and together we'll make it happen. So with that, we are adjourned to closed session.